green? Shouldn't that be green on the?
It's green.
Oh, is it?
Councillors, you are now live on YouTube.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the May Cabinet meeting for Rushcliffe Borough Council. Could I have apologies for absence, please, Ms Stambini?
There are no apologies for absence, Councillor Robinson.
Okay, do you have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, just reference for the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March 2021 enclosed. I'd like to move we accept those minutes. To have a seconder.
Happy to second that.
Councillor Moore. All those in favour of accepting those minutes? Carried unanimously. Okay, citizens' questions, Ms Tambini?
We have no citizens' questions for this meeting, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5, opposition group leaders' questions. I believe we have several of these. Could I ask Councillor Jones, please, to come to the seat to ask your question?
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. My question relates to the last item about the LAD expenditure on government. What specific outcomes did the government's Green Homes Local Authority Delivery Scheme Phase 1 achieve in Rushcliffe in its short timescale? How much of the allocated money was not used and what happened to that money?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. Good evening. The first rounds, LAD 1A and LAD 1B, were issued last year as part of a competitive process. And this council did not apply for funding under that process because they were primarily aimed at housing stock holding authorities. So we didn't enter the competition because that was the priority for the funding. We have obviously secured under the second phase funding, which is allocated through the energy hubs. So the Midlands Energy Hub rather than via a competition. So that's the subject of the paper later on the agenda.
Okay. Do you have a supplementary question, Mr. Councillor Jones?
Yes, Councillor Robinson. Given the short timescale of 7 months left in this phase 2 scheme before the available money is presumably lost back to government, is it really realistic to get contractors to do that work in Eastleigh? And will the Cabinet consider telling the government to stop these short-term allocations, to stop posing with green allocations and make long-term allocations so that councils can plan sensibly ahead?
Mm-hmm. Councillor Brennan.
Yes, there is a challenge, and it's set out in the paper that we need to find suitable contractors that can operate at scale, that can deliver within the timescale that the government has set. It would seem remiss of us not to draw down the funding if we think we can spend it, and looking at internal resources and looking at work with strategic partners, we do believe we'll be able to deliver this within the timescales set by government.
Great.
And will you consider making representations to the government so that green funding is put on a more?
I think green funding has been stated as a priority. Green jobs, the green economy is a clear long-term strategic objective for the government, and we'll be supporting them in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. If I could ask Councillor Thomas, please. Councillor Jones, would you like to ask your question, please, and Councillor Thomas?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Robinson. At Eastleigh, we're very pleased that the proposal for the LAD funding is to target the Rushcliffe estate in Eastleigh, though we're somewhat disappointed that we've only heard about it through the Cabinet papers. Do you see any role for the ward members and parish council in encouraging uptake?
Councillor Brown.
Yes, in answer to your second part of your question, we certainly do. We would very much welcome ward members and your local parish council to encourage homeowners to take advantage of the grants that are available and the works that will be available. If the Cabinet approves the scheme this evening, further details will be available at the beginning of June. And once that project delivery programme is finalised, very happy to have a conversation at that point to agree what would be useful by way of disseminating information both through yourselves as ward councillors and through the parish council to residents. Obviously, there are other potential areas across the borough as well that might benefit from the scheme, and we would look for similar involvement there. With regard to your first point about ward members not being aware before the Cabinet papers were issued, I think that's a fair point. I think it's important that schemes are not announced too prematurely. Cabinet needs to make the decision to agree that it intends to support the scheme such as this, and we don't want to set hairs running or raise expectations in communities before that decision has been taken. However, I do agree, we do agree that as a courtesy, I think it's important that the relevant ward members be given a heads up on schemes like this before they come out in the public domain through the Cabinet papers, unless there's a very good reason why we wouldn't do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thomas, do you have a subsequent question?
Yes, I was going to ask really what the publicity strategy is to try to get people to take up the offer.
Councillor Brown?
When we've got an action plan in place, when we know the programme of activity and the work programme, we will put together a publicity strategy to ensure that people, to raise awareness of the availability of the grants and the works that can be undertaken, and we'll work with you and your colleagues to make sure it's relevant to your ward.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I could ask Councillor Walker, please. Okay, Councillor Walker, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson, and good evening, Cabinet. Will the Cabinet commit Rushcliffe Borough Council to an open and transparent procurement process that prioritises the use of local suppliers and tradespeople so we can keep the money from being extracted out of our communities when tendering for the LAD scheme, therefore ensuring that Rushcliffe's SMEs benefit as well as the residents of the scheme? Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
Thank you. Popular subject. Good evening. Yes, our procurement process is open and transparent. It's available online and on request, in line with the legal requirements required of us with regard to procurement processes. The council supports local businesses in many ways, including alongside our work programmes and projects that we look to commission. We are extremely keen to see local businesses successfully tender for our council contracts, and our procurement strategy will always be designed to secure value for money for local residents and provide opportunities for local businesses to tender directly or to partner with other organisations, larger suppliers, if the capacity is maybe an issue for smaller companies. And we will do that wherever we can do so within the law. With respect to the LAD programme specifically, and I will talk about this a little bit more in the paper at the end of the agenda, there is a very significant budget attached to that, as you're aware. And there's an extremely tight time scale, as has been alluded to already, for delivery. And that means that we need to ensure that we have the capacity, or that the organisations we tender with have the capacity and can operate at the speed that's essential to ensure that we deliver on those priorities. That means that on this occasion, we'll be working with key partners and possibly using existing contract frameworks where a pre-procurement process has already taken place. And some of those will include local companies, to ensure that we maximise delivery whilst following our standing orders and financial regulations as appropriate.
Okay, Councillor Walker, do you have a follow-up question?
I did, but it was answered. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Thank you, Councillor Brown, for those questions. Could we move on then, please, now? So we don't have any further questions, Mr. Tambien, do we? No?
No further questions, Councillor Robinson.
So we can move on then to item 6, the Rushcliffe Quality Scheme for 21-25. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm really pleased, delighted to be bringing the Council's new and updated quality scheme to Cabinet. Our previous scheme ran from 2016 to 2020, just last year. This current one has been updated and refreshed to reflect the current circumstances and issues that have been raised that have come to pass over the last year in respect of the pandemic and in respect of protests and raising awareness of issues that impact on certain sectors of society. It's a much more wide-ranging and strategic approach than we've had before, and the idea is to embed equality and diversity issues in our mainstream and day-to-day activities and delivery. It's crucially important that all residents of the borough are able to access our services equitably, and we recognise that some barriers to access are not always easily identified, and they're not always the ones that we recognise as being barriers. We need to clearly identify what those are, and we need to measure our performance in reducing them and generating positive outcomes for all our residents, our elected members and council employees. This revised scheme runs until 2025, and it's been recommended to Cabinet by the Community Scrutiny Group, which has considered the scheme twice. It's also been out for public consultation during March and April of this year. Obviously online, we weren't able to do actual in-community activity this year. The scheme does have a broader focus than previously, and it will now include progress against inclusion, allowing everybody to access services in the most appropriate way for them to do so. The aims of the scheme are set out in Appendix 1, and they are supported by the commitments set out in points 1 to 4, namely understanding our community, reflecting the diversity of our community, working in partnership to achieve impact, and developing, implementing and monitoring annual action plans. It is important to note that this scheme sets out high-level objectives of the council. The actions set out in Appendix 1 will form the basis of annually reviewed action plans, which will draw on issues and priorities identified with our communities and through local partnerships that work with excluded, vulnerable or disadvantaged groups. The action plans are not standalone and they're not set in stone. They will be embedded across all our annual service plans so they become an integral part of our delivery and ensure that issues of access, equity, diversity and inclusion are at the forefront of all our service design and our delivery on the ground. The action plan for 2021 to 2022 is also attached to your papers and set out in the appendix, and includes actions such as consideration of the impact of COVID-19 across our communities and whether and how this has impact on the delivery or access to our services, strengthening our policies and training in procurement so that we work with suppliers who share our commitment to these objectives, listening to community groups, members and residents to ensure we fulfil our public sector duty, build on our legal obligations under the Equality Act 2010, and support our workforce through training and through listening to them. And we will ensure our recruitment processes are accessible and attract the best talent, and will continue to monitor and report relevant indices in regard to our workforce. As I say, this is an outline, a strategic overview and the context for our plans. Clear data and performance monitoring of our objectives will be delivered through departmental and service delivery plans and reported to members as appropriate. I would therefore like to move that Cabinet agrees the recommendation of paragraph 2 to approve our equality scheme for 21 to 25 and to approve the action plan that supports it for 2021 to 22. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? It's Councillor English. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I fully concur with what Councillor Brennan has expressed in a summary of the refreshed Rushcliffe Equality Scheme. This is an essential document that doesn't really need a hard sell for its adoption. It's been developed after consultations and scrutiny to ensure there is a broad inclusion for everybody. It's a necessity to comply with legislation, but beyond that, it is crucial that no one in the borough is disadvantaged in accessing council services and information, and that all employees are treated equally and made to feel respected, accepted and valued. The document clearly sets out the objectives that need to be embraced to complement the work that has already been done and put in place by the borough. The important factor is that it's a live document, not a finished document to file. It's just one with an annual review, but one that can and will be further developed and enhanced dynamically and responsively. The alternative is the present fixed and rigid scheme, but that cannot be viable as an option in this ever-changing world. So I have no hesitation in supporting and seconding the recommendation to the Cabinet that they approve the Equality Scheme 2021 to 2025 and support an action plan for 2021-22. Thank you. Okay, so we have those recommendations set out on page 11 by Councillor Brent. Do we have any other comments? Anyone would like? Councillor Upton.
Thank you. I concur with what Councillor English says, really, because it is very much a live document, in my opinion. It's an important document. It needs to be reviewed regularly. Current one ran out in 2020, and this one's running to 2025. But I think that the crux of it all is that you're proposing an annual review of your action plan. So it's live, it's work in progress to a degree, and it's very important. So yeah, I do concur with what you say in your comments, Councillor English. Thank you.
Okay. Just for clarity, has this been through two scrutiny groups, so the corporate one and the community one? Is that correct?
No, it's been through communities twice.
Twice.
So they asked for some additional information, and that was brought back and then reviewed before it was sent to us.
Okay, but the paper in 2020 went to the corporate overview scrutiny group. Okay. So that's correct.
Councillor Robinson, the Equality and Diversity Annual Report goes to Corporate Overview Group. So that's where we do the monitoring of the statistics. That gets reported annually to Corporate Overview Group, and that is what's appended to
That's
the
right. That's what I was just saying, a bit confused. Okay, but the actual working document went through the communities one, didn't it, to do that? And that, so every year this will go through which scrutiny group?
I don't think that's been determined yet.
Okay.
Actually.
But we're making a commitment this will go through annually.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's the important thing. But then we'll look at which one. I think the other important aspect of this, there are two sides to this. Obviously, it's with the public and also with our staff as well. It's very, very important. We do identify the challenges on both sides in terms of staff, everything from our recruitment and management of staff, and of course with the public, everything from access of our services and how we actually do that. But as Councillor Upton has obviously outlined, this is a working document. It's not something we put in the drawer and just left and looked at in 2025. It has to be a live document and updated, and we need to react to the environment that we work in and the challenges which that brings. And as we know, even COVID has changed that even over the last year or so. So it's very important that we are responsive. Do we have any other comments before we put this to the vote? Okay, so as proposed by Councillor Brennan, setting out those recommendations on page 11, seconded by Councillor English. All those in favour of accepting the motion recommendations? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, moving to the next item on the agenda. This is the COVID-19 update report. This is a report that I bring to Cabinet on a regular basis, reflecting the impact of COVID on the council and of course more importantly on our residents. Firstly, in terms of the report itself, as you can see on table 4.4, this sets the timeline that was set out by the government, and it seems a long time ago, but it was on the I think on the 4th of January that we actually went into the national lockdown. And since then, as we've seen the roadmap that the government have set out there, so the 8th of March I think with the schools, the 29th of March with the outdoor gatherings of people, the 12th of April, for instance, with the leisure centres. And I think it was confirmed by government on Monday, was it yesterday, that the 17th of May will yield more changes and release of some of the restrictions which are set out there on page 33. And then that's timeline then, of course, to the 21st of June, when we should see the majority of restrictions then dropped. There is a big caveat with that. As the government said, it's working on the science and the data, and that will be monitored. So we'd expect an announcement a couple of weeks before that, 21st of June. And of course, it is very important to mention, of course, the vaccine is what's really underpinning the timescales. and the incredible success, not just on the first vaccine, but also now on the use percentage take up on the second vaccines as well, as we start to move down the age ranges. So this document just sets out the Rushcliffe response, and I've really broken this down into a couple of sections, because I don't really go into complete detail on everything that Rushcliffe is doing. But if we look at in terms of the community response, obviously one of the biggest issues we've had is the management of some of our parks, particularly Bridgefield. As people were given that freedom to get out there, we did get a lot of pressure on our parks, and I'm delighted. I think we responded to that very quickly with the marshalling, making sure that extra bins, making sure we control access. A lot of those items are set out there on 4.6. We made use of the high street ambassadors, again, to help and give them presents, to give assistance and education, but also a clear message that it was important that we were enforcing the COVID restrictions set out by the government at this very important time. As I mentioned at the start of this, the vaccine programme has been absolutely key. I'm delighted that Rushcliffe has played a really, really key part, obviously offering the Gamston Vaccine Centre. As of early April, that has now done over 50,000 vaccines have been delivered. And the response and the feedback from all users of that centre have been absolutely excellent. And I'd like to personally thank all the staff there and volunteers who've done such a tremendous job in actually delivering that for the health service, and of course with the help of Rushcliffe there. Obviously on our doorstep here, we've also been hosting the testing centre at the arena as well. Again, absolutely fundamental to the government strategy to move us out of this pandemic is testing. So we've seen these centres go up. It's almost like we've become a little bit oblivious to them now, don't we? Because they're just there all the time. I'm not quite sure how long they are going to be there for. So that's a separate discussion. But again, they played a very key part of the jigsaw in public health, and Rushcliffe playing its part by giving its facilities. Another very important aspect of Rushcliffe support has been financially. And we've seen the continual business rate grants, the extension of the reopening of high streets for safety, supporting the DWP funding for some of the vulnerable families that we've seen there, and the additional £450,000 that was allocated via the districts as well. And you cannot emphasise enough how important it has been the speed, the efficiency and the effectiveness of getting these grants out to our businesses. And I'd like to pay a really big tribute to Mr. Linfield and his team for achieving those incredible responses and getting that money into the bank accounts of businesses over this unprecedented time. Leisure is obviously been very important. It's probably been impacted as a sector more than many other sectors. Obviously with our partners at Parkwood, with the golf club and the actual leisure centres themselves, we were successful in applying for the £224,000 for the National Leisure Recovery Fund. So I'm delighted that we managed to get our leisure centres open again, and hopefully come 17th of May, we'll see them really with all their services to offer and get their recovery getting back, and certainly getting our residents healthier, fitter as we move out of it. I'd also just like to point out to members, 4.17 there is some of the funding which has been allocated to the community groups. We say this pandemic doesn't make any reference to wealth, age. So I'm delighted that we've been able to channel a lot of those funds to people like the Colgrave Community Kitchen that I was there a couple of weeks ago. It's great to see the impact that has been made on families to actually provide that support. Just to mention hospitality as well, which is a very key part of the Rushcliffe economy. So again, delighted for things like licensing in terms of being able to expand their seating arrangements outside, being able to do that. And of course, the education we've had going through our enforcement officers. And unfortunately, sometimes we've actually had to enforce as well, which obviously been as a default, but it is an important message that we need to keep people safe. Lastly, on this report, just looking forward, some really good news is now that we have penciled in the diary for the 26th of June, our first major event, which is the Proms in the Park. This is planned to be held on Bridgefield with controlled access, But I think it's a very, very important message to all our residents that Rushcliffe is open for business, and we want people now to leave their homes to come out and mix and enjoy safely. And we hopefully have got a number of other events that we're following that we will be publicising and truly making sure that our residents are safe with that. So I think it's been a very, very challenging response, but I'm delighted to bring this update. It's interesting when we do that and you see the depth of all the services of where it's tested us. And when you think about probably about 50 months ago, we didn't do any of this at all. It was so all this has been new and very challenging, both for elected members and for officers alike. So I'd just like to move that recommendation set out on page 31, which is just really noting the work of the officers of the council and the partner in responding and supporting the recovery from COVID-19. So thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Edeving.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. It's very pleasing to see that at the moment everything seems to be moving us back to a path of normality. And I think this report, though, however, does help us to see that we can cover any setbacks that we hope will not arise, but we are prepared if that were to happen. But the good news so far is that everything seems to be looking towards getting back to normal. As you said, as a council, we've made a huge effort to ensure that support has been offered where needed. And I too would like to thank our officers and also all our members and parish councils across the borough. I think they should all be proud of the efforts they've made in looking after their communities. And in terms of looking forward, one of the things Councillor Robinson mentioned hospitality. And of course, we do have some money that we're looking to utilise in the Reopening High Street Safely Fund. And that should help our high street businesses make the most of the opportunities to get back to normal and hopefully beyond that. And as with Councillor Robinson's comments, you know, it's a great pleasure to see that we can even contemplate putting events back on now. And so I'm very happy to second the update.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on this? Councillor Moore.
Well, first of all, a little bit of up-to-date information. Peter Linfield's just fed me that we have currently at the moment got what's called restart grants, because a lot of these businesses have been closed and it's not straightforward just to open them up. We've currently, as of today, given out £3 million worth of restart grants to 392 businesses. Now, I know from speaking to businesses in Rushcliffe how pleased they are with how the speed of us getting money out. And there was a league table put out fairly recently, and we were number 2 in the country, that we had passported on over 99% of the money received from the government. And it was quite disappointing in quite a few areas to see that a lot of local authorities were hanging on to this money and weren't pushing it through to the businesses, which is needed. Just one final general point. I had a conversation with the chief executive because I had to give a talk to a parish council on a similar subject to this. And I said to her, what is the one thing that you could encapsulate in a small sentence as to Rushcliffe, the way Rushcliffe has dealt with the COVID? And she said, I'm going to quote her, it's the spirit of Rushcliffe. And it's the spirit of everybody, the spirit of the officers and everybody here, the spirit, as Councillor Robinson said, the parish councils, the ward members, the support groups that have set up that have come from nowhere. So I love that word, the spirit of Rushcliffe. So I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Really, just to reiterate the points that have previously been made, but I think it is astonishing when you see it all together in one paper like this, just how much effort has been garnered to respond to the crisis that we faced. And it's positive. It makes you think that whatever gets thrown at us, at our partners, we will be able to come together and put on a good show to make sure that we can cope with whatever comes our way. So I think it's quite astonishing, and I hope and I believe that the joint working we've done with our local partners, with voluntary sector groups, with individuals, residents, parish councils and so on will set us in good stead going forward for future work in terms of partnership working and a local voluntary effort. I think it's fantastic. So I'll just add my thanks and congratulations to everybody that made such a huge effort. We're not out of it yet, but we're certainly going in the right direction.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted when I haven't got to bring one of these papers to cabinet again, because if not bringing it to cabinet, it means that we're out of the pandemic and we can concentrate on things. I often say that about cabinet paper, but I think, as Councillor Brown says, we're not out of the woods yet. Still a lot of work to do. And of course, the next phase, or the key phase, is going to be the recovery. This is for businesses, for all our communities, to absolutely make sure that we support them all in what's going to be a very, very challenging and difficult time going forward. But as Councillor Moore said, that word spirit, I think there's another key phrase, we like our cliches here, I think adaptability. I think that's what Office has done very, very well indeed. We've had to adapt because we're in absolutely unprecedented times, unprecedented skills, unprecedented services, isn't it? Who thought we'd be hosting a virus testing centre on our premises and handing over a community centre to give vaccines? Someone said that. And that adaptability and the speed, as we talked about getting the money out, turning finance teams around as quickly as we've done, has been absolutely key. So I think that probably should be on our strap line now, adaptability. Rushcliffe, king of adaptability. Anyway. Okay, well, any further ado and wasting time, I move the recommendations that are out there to note the Rushcliffe response, seconded by Councillor Edivine. All those in favour? Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, moving to the next item on the agenda, which is item 8, which is the East Midlands Freeport update and steps. Now, the starting point for this, as many of you are aware, that in the budget in March, the Chancellor announced that the East Midlands would actually be one of the chosen freeports after the expression of interest. Doesn't mean to say we've actually been granted a freeport, so we need to be careful of our vocabulary here. We've actually basically been supported as an expression of interest, and there's still an awful lot of work to go on this side. We do need to flag the actual name is going to change. It actually won't be called the East Midlands Freeport. You'll see some announcements coming out soon because they needed a better name to sum this up. So there will be some announcements pretty short on this. Obviously, our major interest is the power station. As we know, we have the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station. The plans are that will be decommissioned by 2025 at the latest. It's a very, very challenging site. We have the north side, which is obviously extensively to do with power generation, but we also have the south side as well, which is actually in the green belt and does offer considerable planning challenges for us. Needless to say, we obviously are very keen to support the Freeport, but we do actually note the challenges at the site. We've actually got the interest there. Obviously, just for the record as well, the other sites of the Freeport is south of the airport and the airport itself, and the land by the Toyota, which is on the A38 and also across the way. I'm not quite sure what the other label that land. I can't remember what's done, but we know it's a Toyota land anyway, and everyone knows what it is. So it's an unusual Freeport bid, because it's actually got 3 parcels of land, where I understand a lot of the other Freeports have actually got one major centre in with it. Hence why the branding of it is very important, and that's why there'll be some announcements on that very, very shortly. Just to make sure members are aware of the timescales, I mentioned the budget was announced by the Chancellor, and they really have got to work very, very quickly. The government arrangements for the Freeport, which the government are very keen to make sure they are very tight because it's public money, had to be submitted by the 23rd of April. The risk register for the Freeport had to be submitted by the 20th of April. And we're all working to the point that the Freeport should be agreed in operation by the end of 2021, so this year. So let me stress there is a huge amount of work going on. In fact, this morning there's been extensive meetings. We found out last night, wasn't it, with HMRC. Of course, the tax office, I've got to be absolutely clear, there's very strict governance on this because of the import duties, the way it's going to be managed, and literally meetings are being called at 24-hour notice to make sure that this can move forward. I believe in the Queen's speech this morning, Freeports were actually mentioned again as absolutely key platform of the government's recovery from from the pandemic. So there's a real focus in Westminster to make sure that these are facilitated as quickly as possible. I mentioned about the governments, and I'd just like to share those with members. Leicestershire County Council are the lead authority. So basically, in terms of bank accounts, HR, administration support is all done through Leicestershire. So the government always requires a lead authority. There will actually be 6 local authorities representing on the main board of Freeport, of which Rushcliffe will be one. So there will be 3 upper tier authorities, the county councils, and 3 district councils will actually sit on there. It is a requirement of the Freeport, though, that the majority of board positions must be taken by the private sector. So they very much see that Freeports are private sector led. There will be the appointment of an independent chairman. That recruitment is proceeding now. And that independent chairman has to have a commercial background. So, as I said, the majority of those places, say, must be in terms of the private sector. All the positions on that board have been now proposed to government bar 1. There is still a vacancy in there, which will then be decided when the board is actually put together. If you just look at section 4.7, it actually sets out some of the tasks of that board. And you'll just 4.7, yes, and you'll see there, particularly obviously working with MHCLG to develop the outline business case. This is the key objective now as we move towards that. So the government you set the government's up, risk register. So now we're looking at the outline business case. The government provides seed funding. EY, consultancy company, they are working on this with the local authorities to make sure that this actually meets the requirements of the government in terms of obviously having a viable business case. But we're confident that we can actually meet these timescales, but there's going to be an awful lot of work really going ahead. Just to highlight, one of the very key tasks of the board will be what's called the engagement network, to ensure that Freeport is really a major commercial enterprise, and it must engage with a lot of key partners around, so people like universities, the parish councils, unions, etc. And they'd like to see that actually done through this shadow engagement network. So as we move through these weeks, we'll see these bodies. Hopefully these will be set up and these will be publicised as we go along once the seed funding is released by the government. Lastly, just going back to the power station, as I mentioned at the start, there are very significant challenges to do with the Rushcliffe on Trent site. It's designated as green belt. It's designated in our local plan as a centre of excellence, shall I say. So officers at the moment are working very closely with the owners of the power station to look at the planning challenges we actually have there. And the potential routes are set out, how we can take the planning forward. They're actually set out on 4.5, which I think very clearly set out what those options are. And we'll be working with with the owners of the power station to make a decision on that preferred route. So we can look at some of the main areas there, which will be a concept master plan, environmental assessment, the transport assessment, and then looking at pre-application consultation and engagement. So, as I said, I think the Freeports are a major platform for the government, stressed by the Queen's speech this morning, and they could well play a major part in the economy. Projections of tens and tens of thousands of additional jobs, and I say additional because there have been some fears about just movement of jobs from maybe the cities, but we've made representations as many board members that we must see new businesses brought into the area. We must see new high-tech jobs created in that Freeport, and obviously as Rushcliffe, as a board member, we're making its voice heard that we want to see quality jobs quality environment, particularly with the power station which resides there in Rushcliffe. So I'd like to move the recommendations that are set out there on page 41, and that is, it gives retrospective approval to the nomination of a cabinet member, so it's one of the members of this cabinet to sit on the Freeport board. It notes the progress made so far on the Freeport bid and the proposed next steps, and endorses the approach of working with the site owner and the Freeport Development Corporation to explore developing a local development order or other suitable order to deliver the greater planning certainty for this site. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Edwin.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Robinson. As you say, the Freeport setting up the board, etc., is currently a very fast-moving environment. It needs to adhere to a very challenging government timetable. It is, as you say, particularly important that we work with the site owner of the power station, and it's important as well that the other authorities on the board work with their private sector partners as well. The paper clearly sets out the way in which the Freeport board needs to work. And in our case, the emphasis is to work closely with the Ratcliffe site owner to ensure and define the best route to create development on the site for the benefit of our communities and the jobs that it will bring. Clearly, the last thing we want to see in Rushcliffe is a redundant power station. I think we're all aware of other redundant power stations in the East Midlands, and I think we've been working hard to try and offset that as a potential outcome ever since Ratcliffe was announced that it would be decommissioning by 2025. So I absolutely support the Cabinet recommendation, and I'm delighted to see how it links to our corporate priorities, and that we're talking about development here, but the benefit to local residents, is provision of new jobs, open spaces, and we are looking to see the power station as a major step forward in providing green infrastructure. Clearly, these are goals at the moment. We'd have to achieve them, but I do believe that we could see some very exciting things coming from that site. So I second the recommendation.
Anybody else would like to make any comment? Councillor Upton.
I've driven on the A453 from the M1 many times, and I view it as a major gateway to Rushcliffe and to Nottingham, and you get quite good vistas as you're driving along the 453. And from the day it was announced that the power station will be closing as a coal-fired power station, I thought to myself, what's going to happen to that site? The last thing I want to see is a derelict power station sitting there for a decade or so, as I've seen elsewhere in the country. I mean, that would be disastrous, worst case scenario. So I think, it's the only internal Freeport in the UK, all the rest around the coast. The location in the centre of the country is phenomenal, and the infrastructure that there's already is really good. So I think it's a great opportunity, great location, and really exciting. So I think, yes, we should press ahead with all the resources we can muster, that we can afford, because now is time critical, frankly, and I really do support it on the paper. Thank you.
It's interesting to see with the Freeport, because a lot of these projects take so long, and it's really good to see the ambition. I know it's challenging to get it done so quickly, and obviously there has to be balanced to make sure the governance is right, but to have the ambition to open this by the end of this year, I think it shocked a lot of people. But on the other hand, I think absolutely fantastic, and it's refreshing to see a government, public sector, business coming together and saying we've got a real ambition, and the government saying this is what you've got to work to. We've got to make sure that government says is absolutely right. We've got to make sure that in terms of the planning regulations and everything else work well. But I cannot fault the ambition that the government has to deliver this absolutely key projects and the potential tens and tens of thousands of jobs. And remember, this is running parallel with the Development Corporation as well. So the sites like Toton that are in there, with the Development Corporation. Of course, the hub of the airport with us is key. And as Councillor Upton said, this is the only inland freeport bid in the whole of the country. And it had to compete very strongly against some other bids of other areas. So I really think Rushcliffe should get behind this. I think we should look at it very, very positively. And timing-wise, it couldn't be better, because I think everyone's looking at the moment. There's this horrible phrase that I hate, levelling up. I've no idea what that means. But for me, it's just about creating opportunities for the East Midlands that it deserves. And there's a location, we always said, as Councillor said, what a great location. By motorway, by railway station, by an airport, so unique. And if ever we saw that power station just close and be left there, I think it would be a unmitigated disaster. And you talked about other power stations, there's at least 2 in this county alone that have just sat there, and it's been a really, really poor. And I think that's a failure of councils, of everybody really, when that's happening. I'd also like to pay tribute to the owners of the power station, Uniper. I think they've been absolutely tremendous. They are a private organisation, they've got shareholders, but they've been incredibly cooperative with Rushcliffe. They work very well, and they've got ambitions as well to deliver this, and they don't want to see a vacant power station. So I think it's good news all round. Okay, so any other comments? So I'd like to move those recommendations set out on page 41 on section 2A, B and C, seconded by Councillor Edwin. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So if we could move then to item 9, the local authority delivery, LAD, phase 2 funding. Councillor Brennan, who's an expert on LAD at the moment.
Yeah, lads, we'll go there. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's not the most penetrable title, so it's probably easier if I describe it as the second phase of the Green Homes Grant, which is essentially what it is and is more understandable and makes more sense. It was announced earlier this year, and essentially it's designed to improve the energy efficiency of low-income households in a given area. An allocation is ring-fenced for each district, and the allocation for Rushcliffe is coming in at just under 700,000, and it was announced in April of this year. As I say, the primary purpose of the funds is to raise the energy efficiency rating of low income and low energy performance certificate rated homes. It's available for all tenure types. Whether property is rented to a tenant, there'll be a minimum contribution by the landlord to the cost of the upgrade of 1/3, with the average subsidy not exceeding 5,000 per property, and a maximum of £10,000 grant to owner occupiers. It's anticipated the grant will deliver on a number of objectives, including tackling fuel poverty, delivering carbon savings, and supporting economic resilience and creating green jobs, particularly over the summer in the run-up to the first point where we need to have spent a considerable proportion of the funds in September. The timetable for delivery of the funding is very tight, as I mentioned earlier. The recommendation to the Cabinet is that we adopt a geographical approach in the first instance to try to get this money out the door and deliver to residents. An area of East Leek consisting of non-standard housing of mixed tenure has been identified, and there's an illustration of that at Appendix 1 with your paper of the area that it covers. Work on the properties will include a mixture of external wall insulation and photovoltaics. And a delivery plan to support this and draw down the funds must be submitted by 24th May. In the scheme, we're committed to retrofit a minimum of 25 properties, but we anticipate that we should be able to deliver work on approximately 64 properties, and that may mean that the geographical area will be extended to other appropriate parts of the borough if necessary. It's a very welcome resource, I'm sure we'll agree, to support eligible households in the borough to improve their energy efficiency and lower their costs. It is fair to say, however, that the turnaround time to spend this funding is extremely tight. As I said, the first 50% must be spent by September of this year, and all activity completed by the end of December this year. And this was picked up in questions earlier, but the timetable is further challenged because we need to identify specialist contractors to undertake the work, and this at a time when all eligible local authorities who are also trying to spend this funding will be looking to do so from the same pool of limited pool of specialist providers. However, officers are confident, we're confident that with the support of the Midlands Energy Hub and internal resource here at the council, we will be able to deliver the programme and deliver it on time. And therefore, I'm asking the Cabinet, please, to note and approve the recommendations set out on paragraph 2 of the paper, namely to note that the funding has been accepted, to note that the project is extremely time pressured, to agree that the target area is initially focused on Eastleek and then extended as and if necessary, and agree that the revenue and capital budget programmes are amended to reflect the grant. Thank you.
Okay. Have a second, please. Councillor Moore.
Well, fuel poverty is one of those hidden items we don't always hear about, but it really is a major issue, particularly after lockdown, and particularly with people working at home. I was quite horrified with my own bills after being at home so much over the winter. So anything we can do is good news for the residents of Rushcliffe. I really would like to this opportunity to thank the officers for going for this grant and getting this grant and implementing it, as they say, on time. I've just had some quite extensive work done on my heating system with sophisticated energy saving controls. I got it done and dusted in 4 weeks. So there are people out there, and I'm sure the officers have got them lined up. So, well, I'm chairman of Eastleek Growth Board, as most of you know, and we have one of the ward members over here, Councillor Thomas, but I'm sure the 64 residents of Eastleek will be very pleased with the benefits that this get from the energy saving improvements. And I'm sure the ward members over at Eastleek and the Parish Council will support this activity with a lot of energy. So yes, very happy to second this recommendation, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Any other comments at all on this? I think it's obviously key. The government's really set out a very ambitious target on the environment, and we've always highlighted, isn't it, that housing is going to be absolutely key platform of this. I know there's a lot on cars and everything else, but is it 2025? I think gas boilers are going to be out there. 20, yeah. Yeah, yeah, 25, that's right, yeah. That's obviously part of it, and of course we've got this huge state of properties which just aren't economically very good in terms of fuel, in terms of usage and things. So I think this retrofit is a really good step, and I really hope the government expand this and allow it to expand, because we know that there could be a huge take up on this. And is it 10k per property, I think, max? Yeah, isn't it? You get an awful lot, can't you, for 10k in terms of working with these properties, so done quickly. Not quite sure why the time table is so tight in spending it, but I think again it works both ways, doesn't it? If you gave 2 years, people take 2 years to do it, wouldn't they? Give them 6 months, 6 months they'll do it. So let's just welcome the money anyway, and let's really look forward to seeing the positive results from it. So okay, so proposed there by Councillor Brennan, the recommendations that are set out on page 49, A, B, C, D, I guess just A, B, C, D, seconded by Councillor Moore. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Okay, so that concludes then the major items that we have on the agenda. Just like before we finish, I'd just like to record my thanks to Councillor Upton, who will be leaving the Cabinet, and thank you very much for all your contribution, and good luck to your career across the Bash Road to the dark side.
Thank you, Chairman. I've enjoyed being on Cabinet and found it very fulfilling. I shall missed the experience, I must say, but thank you very much. for
Well,
those kind
you
words.
can always tune into our channel, our video channel. It's running every night, every night live, and the highlights and even later as well.
I probably will if I have
Yeah.
one of those.
But no,
Thank you very much.
And also, thank you very much, Councillor Upton. Really appreciate over these years, and look forward to your contribution there as continuing as a councillor. That's all. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for everything. Thank you for your questions, and have a safely. The first time I can say this, have a safe drive home instead of walking up the stairs.